I want to welcome somebody who's very, very dear to my heart, and I think very dear to a lot of people. I think Annie Barbour, who lost her home in the Tubbs fire in 2017, had no idea. I think when that happened, how her life would change, not just drastically from that particular fire, but even up to today, and all the work that she's been able to do. She's been a guiding light for so many people. And she started off first as a volunteer. She started off as a community leader. She started in her neighborhood, something called, from the Tubbs fire, something called Coffey Strong. And then as a result of that, and then worked with UP as a volunteer, eventually, Annie, you started working as a staffer and going all over the United States, helping people as a survivor and helping people that are going through what you once went through as well. And I think it's one of the greatest stories, and something that's very, very different. We haven't had a person who's actually gone through this and survived it and look at it from your view. And that's the reason why I invited you here tonight. And I just can't tell you how pleased I am. So welcome to Claim Game.
Well, thank you for having me, Chip.
Why don't we start, and why don't you take us back to what it used to be when that fire first struck back for you, and what you first had to go through, and what your first feelings were. If you don't mind going back, I think everybody would be intrigued to know your story and how you got started in this.
Absolutely. So I lost my home October 9th of 2017. When I went to bed that night, there was a fire in Calistoga. And the only reason I knew that was because my little dog wanted to go outside. And when I opened the door, she said, just look out there. And at that point, the fire was about 14 miles away from me. And I put Nixle on my phone, not thinking that it would get to me by any means. I live in a suburb. I live in a track home city, city park. It's just not where you expect a fire to come through. And if anybody had told me that a wildfire would take out my home, I would have laughed in their face. But nonetheless, I went to bed, and a little after 2, I got a Nixle that said, fire jumped 101, heading to Coffey Park, evacuate immediately. And of course, it feels very surreal. It does not. You're thinking, really? A wildfire? I mean, the houses next door aren't on fire. How could this happen? And I just basically got up and got dressed, grabbed my purse, my little dog on her leash, and some money that I had in the drawer. And when I walked outside, it was like apocalyptic. It was that white smoke. The wind was howling. You felt like you were walking in mud. It's the only way I can explain it. And I thought, okay, I'll go get my safe deposit box, put the dog in the car, thinking, what should I do next? My neighbor called and said, Annie, are you out? We're out. And I said, I'm just going to go grab a couple things. Well, they had just driven around the corner and everything was on fire. And she said, get the hell out. And when she said out, my neighbor's yard got hit with an ember and it exploded in flames. And I said,
exploded.
Oh, it exploded. There was 3 of us who saw it happen, and that propelled us to get out even faster. I ran across the street. The neighbors were gone on a cruise. Their adult grandchildren were watching the pets. I banged on their door. I banged on my neighbor next door, and off I went. So it took about 2.5 minutes is what a rough calculation is. My neighbor got out at the 4-minute mark, and the back bumper of her car was melted. So that fire came extremely fast, and you really didn't have much time to react. It's sad to say that we lost 5 people in our neighborhood. I think it would have been much more if we had not been a close-knit neighborhood. People calling each other, banging on doors. Did not see a first responder in my evacuation.
Annie, what were you able to take with you, if anything?
My dog. My dog, my purse, and some money. And, lessons learned, right? One of the things I said to my son, who is an adult, lived about a mile away from me. I called him and his future wife, and they got out and met me. And one of the first things I said later, after we realized that the house was gone, because really when I left, I thought, did I even shut the front door? Not that it mattered, right? But
Right.
did I shut the front door? Because you're thinking you're going to come back, and that house is going to be.
Annie, I just the whole story, and I've heard a number of stories where people just run out, and I've had clients that jumped in the swimming pool because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to get out, with the cars. And to me, I've always thought, when I get shown how far away, where the fire is and how quick it gets because of the speed of the wildfire, it's just really amazing. I mean, it's almost surreal when people, talk to me about it. And I imagine it was, how many minutes was it from the time you first noticed to the time you're leaving?
I did from the Nixle alert, and from the time I called my son, which was when I had just gotten 2 blocks away from the house, not out of the subdivision, but 2 blocks away from the house into traffic, sitting there. And then I called him. That was 2 minutes and 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't quite realize how fast the wildfires move, and it's not much time. You got to go. And then the next thing is, once you start getting down with a car, there's usually traffic jams and everything else. It's the hurricanes actually are a lot more slow moving, with a lot more time to know, I think, than what a wildfire is. And a lot of people I think it takes a while to process that. For everybody that's listening in tonight, if you have any questions whatsoever, just write them into the chat. I'm going to go back. Kathy McConnell, her job is to keep track of all that. And eventually I'm going to ask Kathy, as we get into this, what questions there are. She might even interrupt as we go through this. So Annie, let me ask you, after you find out you've lost your home and your community is just in shambles, how do you start to begin to process that? Tell me what happened with you.
I had no idea how to start the process. To be very honest with you, the one thing that I totally recognize about survivors is we don't know the questions to ask. So you're kind of at the mercy of the information you get initially. Obviously, I filed the claim. I, started documenting what I'd lost. I had notebooks all over the place trying to figure some of the things out. But quite frankly, I was in shock. I didn't have a home to go back to. I didn't have my regular routine. I had no way to capture, my desk was gone. Everything that you use to organize your life is not there. And so you end up starting to have these piles of stuff. When we started to get organized, for myself, I was not, that first 10 days, there was no organization. There was a lot of notes. There was a lot of talking to neighbors, calling each other, finding out, how do we go forward? We had a community meeting at about the 8 or 10 day mark. And thankfully in that meeting, it broke our hearts and it lifted us up at the same time, because we had production builders. You usually use 3 different types of builders. A production builder will come in with pre-master floor plans like they're building a new subdivision. And you pick your floor plan, you pick your elevation, and then you proceed. And then there's semi-custom, similar, but you can customize part of it in custom. And a production builder stood up in that meeting and said, I only built 30 homes last year. I have no idea how we would move forward on just in Coffey Park. It was 6,000 for the whole fire, but 1,440 in Coffey Park. He said, I don't know where I'd put subs. I don't know how I would get all the product. He said, I have no idea. And we were just devastated. You could have
I
heard
know
me.
we have a lot. Yeah, I sometimes I actually talk about the hero contractors, or the ones that are really good, that are really good and do specialize and come out and help people out. I know it seems a little bit, different on that, because you have to then, people in your shoes have to differentiate the ones that are really the heroes and the ones that I call are the pretenders. And that is a very difficult job to do, I think, for many people. But we have a pretty broad audience of people. Obviously, tonight we're going to have survivors going to be here, and a lot of people from the insurance industry and a lot from the insurance restoration industry too, which I believe those people play a pretty important role too. Let me ask you this: what would be your first biggest challenges you faced with your insurance company? And then, because we do have insurance adjusters that I'm positive are going to be watching or listening to this, and if not, I'm going to help them get the message. What would you suggest to them when they first meet somebody like you, who's gone through this, who's lost everything? What would you provide to them for advice to talk to somebody like you?
I think they need to go through some sort of training, quite frankly, because when I first talked to my adjuster was 3 days after the fire, 4 days after the fire, and he was pretty good. But this is like a death, and you're in a deep grief, and you're also traumatized. I mean, you're just totally off balance. And I think being able to recognize that and know how to deal a little bit with it. I'm not saying that they're going to become therapists, but if this is their line of work, I think some training in that aspect would be really helpful for them and for the survivors.
I'd agree with that. I gave a speech last week to the California Association of Realtors, and I've given a similar speech to public adjusters out in Colorado before, talking about what I call active and curious learning, and then making certain that whenever we speak, it's going to be with respect to validation of whatever the people have gone through, and it's very counterintuitive for those of us who are taught to always be, look on the bright side, help people's spirits up, and really that's not the time to do anything like that. And instead, it's to listen, validate what it is, and not be a cheerleader, as a matter of fact. So I think we could have a lot more training on them. Yeah, I don't. As a matter of fact, I've even suggested people that when I speak with people, I try to keep it as simple as possible, one or two things at first, because there's a lot going on with everybody. But I appreciate that, and I hope that the insurance industry, who's listening in here, it's sometimes what I feel like is the independent adjusters that are out there that are doing more and more of this work. It's not really a place, that type of training and time, because it takes time to talk to people and first to bond, and that doesn't seem to get paid for. It's I'm not here to criticize the insurance industry. I'm just trying to help make suggestions on it. So tell me about Coffey Strong, though. Tell me, how did that get started, and what did it do, and do you what inspired you to get going on that? And do you find that the other social media groups or other type of community groups are kind of similar, from Coffey Strong? Tell me all about this.
So the same night that we had our hearts broken by being told that they really had no concept of how we would build back, James Gore, who is our county supervisor, he got called out in the meeting, and someone said, "How come you're texting?" Well, we lost everything. And I still give him a bad time about it. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I'm trying to find out answers to your questions." Well, what he had finally heard was that the block captain program had worked in some areas. And so basically, he organized us. But it was so basic, which actually ended up perfect, because none of us knew what the hell we were doing. He literally just divided up Coffey Park. He did the same for the Mark West area, which was his, and said, you ask for volunteers, and those people are block captains in that area, and you find out the needs of your community, and you get the answers. And that was the basis for the whole thing. I'll tell you that I raise my hand, because unless I'm doing something productive, I wouldn't sleep. So that was part of my healing and my being able to handle all this. Now, if you told me what the learning curve was, I promise you I wouldn't have raised my hand. We didn't know so many things, and we're texting each other during meetings with the city or whatever. What's an apron bib? I've never heard of an apron bib. Oh, that's the entrance into your driveway. I mean, the fundamentals that we had to learn, but we did. And, everybody had their own part, and some people gave 80% and some people gave 10%. And it didn't matter, because the bottom line was we needed all of that to get our community back. And so we just started with, let's get the answers. Let's get them in the right formation. So in an email format, so we didn't change any of the words from the city. Anything that was people were going to rely on to be true had to be word for word. And that's where we started. From there, we ended up becoming a nonprofit. And, we had bingo games to make money. We had Coffey Strong shirts. We did neighborhood walks and barbecues. When the Paradise Fire hit and all the smoke came in at the 1 year, one of our gals said, I'm going to go to the court across from my burnt out lot, and I'm going to bring a chair, a glass, and a bottle of wine. And anybody who wants to come wine with me, WHINE, is welcome. We built community. And in that process, we built trust. And people leaned on each other. And that's how our recovery happened.
Tell me, how did you then begin working with United Policyholders?
Well, we had another fire in Santa Rosa, the Kincaid fire. And the mayor came to us and said, we want the presence of Coffey Strong here to buffer for these new survivors. And we said, absolutely. And from there, Amy called me and said, would you be willing to host a table for UP at the local assistance center? And I said, well, we have to do one for Coffey Strong, but we can team up. And so that was my first real connection with Amy. I did not have to utilize services for my insurance. My insurance was pretty spot on. I didn't get a lot of pushback. So after that event, she said, if I can find another grant, would you come work for us?
See, if you can go find money to pay you for a job, you can come work with us.
Exactly.
I love Amy Bach. I mean, at times she's just putting shoestrings together at times just to help out. But for me, it's just such a great organization to contribute to, because you'll do such great work. But I don't think people realize how, as a nonprofit organization, and it's gotten better over the years, much better over the years. And probably as a result of your work and that of Amy's as well too. But it's definitely the type of organization, where the money's being spent. It's being spent in really good places as it goes through. So tell me what then became your role with United Policyholders and your role as a liaison and a program leader. I'm kind of curious, what do you do there day to day now?
So when I started out, it was really basic. I sat on the long-term recovery groups for different fires. I was, quite frankly, the token survivor who could kind of push the needle a little bit and say, yes, we're insurance focused. But in my fire, we found that there was all these challenges with builders. And I have a formula that, I would like to share with survivors so that they don't get in the same situation. And Amy was like, let's do it. So I kind of inched in, and my role kept expanding until, I'm the program liaison. I've had a number of different titles, but basically I'm first touch with survivors. I do a lot of mentoring when they have questions, and just trying to make sure that every group has the kind of advocacy and resources and oversight that we can offer, and knowing when that has to be plugged in. And every community is different. So everything has to be somewhat modified depending on what that community is and the demographics. But we're able to do that, which is really quite amazing.
Well, I've noticed, I mean, I've seen newspaper articles about you out in Hawaii. I think I wrote a blog about that one time, and Maui's a very different area than the, the various areas in California that have unfortunately suffered from wildfire, and out in Colorado, you've done work out there too. But, what do you find, what's a common theme, common issues that, are or between all these survivors in different areas? What do you find is the most common issues that they all face?
Are you talking about insurance wise or?
Well, it could be. I mean, look, everybody's struggling through something. I do believe that recovery is more than just insurance. And we've got to realize that if we're in this business. I mean, the reason I'm giving those speeches out there about how to talk with other people is so that we can better emotionally help our clients and whoever we're trying to help, provide education, not cause more trauma, and help in the recovery, which I think is also not just the financial safety blanket that insurance provides, but it also is the emotional aspect that I think people are going through afterwards. And then the only way I can really communicate with somebody is after I can bond with them first, and them actually listen to me versus you're just another one of these other people that don't know what they're doing. So
exactly. And as I think I've shared with you, as survivors, we don't even know the questions to ask. We don't know what to ask someone like you, our insurance company, our builders. This is foreign territory. And overnight, you have now had to put on 5 different hats, plus take care of yourself and your family and go to work every day. So the challenges are real. Obviously, the big thing is under insurance. It always has been. Making that list. Recognizing that no matter how much you lost in the fire, that the biggest thing that I find that we all have in common is that you've lost your sense of safety. You've lost your comfort zone. At the end of the day, we all go home and we sit in our favorite chair with all of our stuff around us that we've accumulated, whether we like it or not still. But it's our comfort zone. And you lay your head on the pillow and you expect that your alarm clock is going to wake you up the next day. Not that you're going to get an alert that you need to get your butt to your car and get out. And so I think that there's a multitude of challenges. I think that hiring a contractor is just ripe for being re-victimized. And so, having people recognize that this is emotional, it's mental, and it becomes physical. I had 3 men on my block in their early 50s who had open heart surgery in the 3rd year of recovery. We had a police sergeant who lost his entire memory. He's retired the night of the fire and had to fight to get it back. This is not something that you have all your insurance challenges, you have your rebuilding challenges, but at the core of it, if you don't have yourself, you're in deep trouble because you can't navigate those other things.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. When I doing the discussions with others about good bedside manner, I remind everybody that a lot of times in the neighborhood, there's increases with respect to divorce, alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic issues. I've talked to chief of police talking about their entire neighborhood is just different. Otherwise, what used to be great people are really struggling, and they do some things that really aren't, typical of them, and it falls on. And now they're suffering as well too, in a very different way, because they don't want to have to go down and arrest and throw people in jail. It used to be great law-abiding citizens. There's a lot that's going on with it, and I appreciate sometimes it's just not talked about. So, and that might lead to this next question, but how is survivor to survivor in that relationship different than other forms? Because I think that's, I really haven't had it talked about, but I'm kind of curious about, what's the dynamic of that?
So, when you have a death in your family and people flock to you for the first month, and then they get on with their life. It's similar for survivors. People come out of the woodwork. They want to help you, but it's just human nature that their lives go on. When you're dealing with survivor to survivor, you have somebody across from you who is generally in it for the long haul. They understand what you're going through. They understand your frustrations. For us being previous catastrophic survivors and coming into people who are fresh survivors, that is huge. Just letting them know that we know how they feel, that we truly have been there, and that we're sitting on the other side of the table, and that is proof positive that they can make it through, that will help guide them, and that at the end of the day, we recovered, so they can too. And I think that's huge. Our group thing, our Wine Wednesday that we still periodically have, it was amazing that, someone would bring a barbecue. You'd bring some cheese and crackers, whatever. The kids be running around on their scooters, and you felt at home. Now, there wasn't any houses around us when we started, okay? So we'd have to move it periodically. Oh, there's some construction there. We got to move it over to this court. But, you could walk up and say it wasn't therapy where you were on the spot. It was, boy, and Amy, if you're listening, this isn't about you. You might walk up and say, God, my boss was horrible today, right? It just was about you being a person in this environment. And then if there was something that you wanted to share, those people there understood it. We still have a Facebook group. And when we have a couple guys who love to smoke briskets, they go on the Facebook group and they say, I don't want to trigger anybody. I'm going to be smoking a brisket on Saturday. So just know, these people have your back now. They understand what your triggers are. They understand your sick sense of humor about fire, right? We have 2 people in the neighborhood who have signs in their yard that say, in case of fire, run like hell and go crazy. And it's got this little guy, right? Because if you don't have some sort of sense of humor, you're in trouble. But in the big picture, other survivors get it.
Let me ask you, so, and this is, maybe it's a 2-part question, but, what's the first most important step survivors can do after they find that they've completely lost everything? And I guess the corollary to that is, what are people's biggest mistakes that you find have just lost everything?
And that's why we really like to get in at the Disaster Resource Center or local assistance center before they have that opportunity to make a mistake. Documenting everything, the recap email every time they talk to their adjuster, so that things don't change. We all know that they can have an adjuster from the insurance company, and 3 weeks later, they might have a new one. And whatever the communication has been up to that point that you think is solid, if you don't have that backup in an email confirmation, you could be in trouble. But really, one of the big ones is paying off their mortgage. Their first instinct, if they don't have a huge mortgage, is, okay, I'm getting this check. A third of your dwelling coverage in California as your contents. I'm just going to pay it off so I don't have to deal with it. But if you're retired, if maybe you won't qualify, maybe you think you have plenty of insurance to rebuild, and you're not going to know for a while the gap that you're going to have, that can really make your life really difficult. And for those who are retired and on a limited income, that can make it so that they can't recover. If you have a 2.5% interest rate and you have to come back and pay a 7 or an 8%, that can kill a survivor. in the
Yeah.
recovery process.
I think, I mean, it's always great to be debt free, but the truth of the matter is, and I think you mentioned it earlier, I mean, I'm down here, I'm in Gulfport, Mississippi, but right after Katrina, like 95% of everybody was way underinsured. And I not only had to collect almost the policy limits on the wind policy, I had to do the same thing on the flood policies. And, from Katrina, but I find that in the wildfires, I find that no matter where I go, that one of the biggest problems we have is there's just not enough money to pay everything off so people can get reconstructed. It's an issue that is going to go beyond this, tonight on it. But I think it's important to remember, conserve that money, and you need those other loans. Don't just use it to pay off your loans when you first get it.
Yeah, we
So
really stress the SBA loan and the FEMA, because we know that insurance in general will not be enough, but most people don't know that they have to keep current on that. So if they get declined, they have to appeal it, or once they're out of the system. So yeah, we're insurance conscious, but we're also very much survivor conscious. How do they navigate this?
Yeah, I could ask you some more about the, insurance, but I want to switch just a little bit. But, how do you balance your own healing with the emotional weight of helping others? I know it's a weird thing to kind of ask, and people might think, Chip, you're getting too feely tonight on this stuff, but I know where to tell people, I think, to go, with respect to, document and stuff like that. But we just don't spend enough time, I think, really learning what some of the emotional weight is that the survivors are going through. And I'm kind of curious how you deal with that when you have to go back and talk to everybody.
Yeah, so you have to take care of yourself. We recognized in LA, we would be at that table, myself and all of our volunteers, for hours on end. And nobody wanted to get up to do anything but go to the bathroom and leave survivors waiting. And, we recognize that you start absorbing other people's trauma and it can trigger you. So at the end of the day, you have to debrief yourself. You have to either do something physical where you get rid of what you're holding on to. Of course, in Maui, it was easy because I just go walk the beach in the morning and at night, right? But most places you don't have that opportunity. So I try really hard to find a hotel that has a gym. I do some journaling, and I try to bring a novel so that I can kind of distract myself, let go, relax a bit. All of those things are pretty important.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I really hadn't heard somebody talk about the positive aspects of what you can do to help, getting through it. If you're like me, I get nervous. I eat too much. If I have stress, I'll drink too much wine. I mean, that's just the way it is. And that's not the healthy way to deal with it. So I appreciate you saying that. It makes a lot of sense. Sometimes, and this is when people talk to me, it's like, well, how long is this going to take if we hire an attorney? And the truth of the matter is that sometimes wildfire recovery I like to say it takes months. Sometimes it does take years. What does resilience look like, over such a long period of time for people that are struggling with underinsurance issues, sometimes insurance denial issues. And right now in Los Angeles, we're facing a lot of the big issues. People are asking, well, when are the insurance companies going to change their mind about all the smoke damage and paying for that? And, and how long is it going to take for me to resolve my claims with the insurance agent that's left me millions of dollars underinsured? I mean, and it's always like, it's going to take a while. Maybe we can get it done quick. And we have had, resolutions that are quick, but what's that look like over a period of time?
So I'm going to really address the smoke issue on this one. We saw it in Colorado big time, where, people would react when they went back home. There wasn't a lot of, in my fire, there wasn't a lot of people who really recognized the amount of toxins that could be in those houses. And obviously, when you're looking at LA and these areas, those houses are 50 to 100 years old. So they have more lead pipe, they have lead paint, they have asbestos. So I personally think that people who have smoke damage, they're having in many cases, a tougher time than people who have a total loss. They got back home and said, my home's here. I didn't lose it. All my stuff's here. And now they just keep slowly losing piece by piece of it. No, that's not salvageable. Well, your home's right there, but you can't go back. I think emotionally, at least for me, I went back home. There was nothing there. I could start my healing. So I think that the smoke damage is really impactful for people. The resilience will come from really yourself, allowing your family to boost you up, your neighbors. All of that is imperative in all of this. You cannot go it alone. And the more the merrier, because really that is what is going to move the needle, right, in these cases, but it's also going to be your support system.
I think, even as an attorney just working, I find that it's kind of weird to say this. Sometimes it's the stronger cases that bring along the weak cases when I'm working with, because the volume of cases we do will rise typically, but people have a lot of common issues that I'm dealing with them. And so on the, some of the back range cases that we had before the Boulder fires came, there was just delays with the independent adjusters couldn't figure out. It took them a year to figure out what it is that the value and how you go about doing a house that's completely destroyed, or a business that's completely destroyed. They just didn't know how to do a total estimate. On other fires in Boulder, we started having the smoke damage claims from people right down the streets, and the homes are literally sucking in everything from the outside. But I wasn't finding beryllium. Now we get these really exotic metals for the first time in the Los Angeles fires. They're really like, whoa, that's the type of stuff that they tell you got to get away. It's almost like Chernobyl type stuff. And I don't, all I can tell people is that I listen to the experts. This is really dangerous stuff. I don't know how to deal with that though as a survivor. When I tell that to my clients, it's like, well, what do I do? Because I do see it, I guess, but I can't go back safely. What's the message there, Annie? What can we tell them? Because I don't want to. I tell them, it's your decision, but you don't supposed to be going back to places that really have these dangerous toxins in them.
I have a standard line now. It's the fire didn't take you. Don't let the recovery take you, whether that's emotionally or going back into a contaminated home. You got out the first time. The most important thing you can do is to get out. Your financial security is obviously wrapped up into that home, and that is a huge challenge for most people. But hindsight, how are you going to feel 10 years down the line if people in your family are sick? Yourself, or if you yourself get sick, was it worth it? But no, I wouldn't want to be in your position of, they have to rely on the experts, and they have to, survivors have this thing where they just want to go home. And I talked to many after we were at the Disaster Resource Center who would contact me, and they'd have that cough. They'd have sniffles, and I'd say, are you sick? No, I've been this way since I came back home. Oh, you're at home and you haven't had it done. So it's a tough situation.
So maybe you can give me a good story here. We're getting awfully sad, and I don't want it to be that way, because I think recovery means that there's going to be some happiness at the end of this thing. But so can you share a story with me about somebody who you've helped through United Policyholders that story's really stuck with you? Because I'm coughing right now, and it's just what I need.
This is probably my favorite story. We have people who send me cards. They call me and tell me, that without me, they wouldn't have been able to recover emotionally, that without UP and all of our guidance, that they wouldn't have been able to get their houses back. We hear that, and that is huge. And that's why we do this work. But when I was in Maui, this is one of my favorites. The Hyatt, I was jumping from place to place because, there was so many different locations for local assistance centers or DRCs. And the Hyatt was the one that FEMA set up. Well, locals don't like government, so they wouldn't come. So one of the gals that I talked to who came by told the HR inside Hyatt that we had this nonprofit down there that could help her employees. And she came down and I talked to her for like an hour and I walked her through and gave her a bunch of literature. And she said, none of my survivors will, none of my homeowners, none of my employees will come down here because it's government. And I said, I get that. I get it. So we kind of made a pact that we'd keep an eye out. The next day, this huge Hawaiian guy came with his shirt on from work. He'd just gotten off and he said, why should I trust you? And I said, you shouldn't. And he goes, what? And I said, no, really, you shouldn't. I said, you're in a really vulnerable place and people will take advantage of you. I personally am a wildfire survivor from Santa Rosa, kind of gave him a quick background story. And then he shared his story of looking out over Lahaina and that his dad that night kicked him in the butt and said, go get your mom. And his manager said, please go. He said, you won't get a car in there though. Now this is a really big Hawaiian guy. He ran all the way home. And he came through the doors and his mother, his brother, and his sister-in-law were sitting there playing cards by candlelight because they had no idea that there was a fire going on. And he got him out. Thank God. And, he said, I'm a Taurus. And so, when I'm stubborn, I'm stubborn. And I said, I'm a Taurus. And he said, May. And I said, May 17th. I said, 17th? He said, no way. 1962. And he starts to pull out his wallet and I start getting my information out and we compare. And he's like, you're my sister from another mister. I totally trust you. And I said, no, that's not a good reason. So that was one of my favorite stories just because, people are just people. And you connect however you can connect. And he wanted to share his story with me, but it just propelled him through this. And, I gave him a lot of information that day. He came back numerous times. When he was working, he'd always stop by and say hi. But those are the people that you meet that, at the end of the 10-minute conversation or the half an hour that you stand up and they come running around to give you a big hug because they connected with you. They feel more empowered. They feel like they can make it through.
So you've listened to, it must be by now, thousands of stories of people that have gone through this, and you're working with United Policyholders, which does have to do with insurance. If you were to provide any advice that you could to the insurance companies, the executives, and the adjusters that are out there so that they can do a better job supporting their customers and the policyholders and survivors, what would you tell them, Annie?
First and foremost, I would tell them that the majority of people get a mortgage and therefore they get insurance, but they don't understand what they can charge to those different buckets of insurance. So how do you know if you have enough loss of use or ALE if you don't know that you can charge an inflated rent? You can rent your contents. It may pay for moving. It'll pay for extra mileage. When people have that information and how long it would need to last, they can do the basic math and make sure that they feel comfortable. Then they can go back to their agent. Same, with their dwelling. I have people we do a lot of preparedness events. And I have people who say, well, I have 150% replacement value because that's what it says. No, you have 50%, right? do the math, take those two numbers, divide it by your square footage. What will you have per square foot? And it's very basic on a lot of this stuff, but do the educational piece when they first get insurance, and every year check in. And I don't think, I think that I feel like they write it with a bunch of lawyers who make it so it's hard for you to understand. And I think that they could break that down. And I'm not pointing my finger at you, Merlin.
You really think lawyers are going to be with the insurance companies are thinking that far in the future that they're writing these policies that you have to have a lawyer to understand it or go through it? I mean, maybe. I've never thought about it that way, Amy.
I meet,
but as a survivor, that's what you think.
Yeah, I meet so many people at these preparedness events who have no clue what's in their policy. And I'm not even talking about the deep dive of endorsements or anything else. I'm just talking about your standard buckets. They don't know what code upgrades are. They don't understand that if their home's really old, that they're going to need more. And how do they capture more? Well, talk to your agent, but it may be that you have to raise your dwelling coverage to get more on your code upgrades, right? Just very practical things.
Yeah, we're going to get into the questions in just a little bit, but I think about, and I'm not making fun of any judges or Chip's now taking on not just the insurance industry, but judges, but they often say that it's the responsibility of the policyholder to get their policy and read it and understand it before any loss happens. And I'm like, what as a judge, you read it, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and I bet you're going to get an F after I give you some examples about where this might sit. Nobody reads their insurance policy. And one of the reasons why they don't, if you try, you don't understand it anyway. I mean, I'm spending my entire life trying to understand the interpretation of insurance policies, studying them every single day. And we still have disagreements about it. There's just no way I think a layperson, can do it. And we have, don't get me wrong, a contract's a contract, but really putting that on it's a very difficult process to fully understand.
And
so
as far as adjusters go, Chip, just if you could make it as simple as you can. I know that it's a give and take, it's a negotiation a lot of the times, but when people say, what do I have in my policy and how do I capture that? That's a question you need to answer. And, hopefully try to guide them. I know that, it's one against the other, right? And they're supposed to be, protecting the insurance company. But there needs to be some commitment by the insurance companies with the adjusters that they send out that they acknowledge that this is a contract, because that's what they tell the consumer, and that they need to abide by the contract. But the consumer needs to know what's in there, and you need to help them.
So for public adjusters who might be watching or then come back and watch this later, what kind of advice would you give to them? Annie, did you get a public adjuster to help you by any chance?
I did not.
No.
I did not need one. My insurance was amazingly easy. I hate to, I'm almost embarrassed to say it when I talk to other survivors, but that was not, I saw my neighbors go through it. But for me, I was very fortunate.
So when public adjusters first approach somebody who's just lost everything, what kind of advice would you give to them? And then I'm curious what would you suggest to the survivors, the policyholders who've been wiped out, about the selection of a public adjuster, and what type of public adjuster they should be looking for?
So we generally tell people to see how they can make a go of it first. Everybody's underinsured, and you will have to give a percentage to a public adjuster. Take your time, see if we can give you the tools. Make sure that you run into a hard stop before you hire a public adjuster. Now, there's people out there who, if I'm 75, I'm going to say, to hell with it. I want a public adjuster to deal with this, right? I mean, there's cases where people just don't want to deal with it or have the bandwidth. And there's always going to be those cases. And there's going to be cases where people get stuck and they need to hire one. Nothing against public adjusters, just that as a survivor, I recognize that the challenges are so deep financially that if you can navigate it yourself and not have to give more money to a public adjuster, that's the best case scenario for you. And the ones who show up right off the bat and are very aggressive, I struggle with those. And I tell people, don't even look at them, because you can't prey on people who are traumatized. You need to give them that space. I realize it's a business, and you want people to be treated like humans.
I appreciate that. Hey, Kathy, I know I've seen a number of questions come through here. We only have 10 minutes, maybe 9 minutes left. What do you have for us and for Annie to help answer on some of what you got there?
Yep. So I've got a few questions. I hope you guys can hear me okay.
Perfect.
Sorry about my background. This is my beautiful office. And so the first question is for you, Chip. In your experience, have you heard about any fire departments leaving information and providing instruction for wildland forest interface for homeowners and businesses to prepare in the event of a wildland fire? Seems like this should be a requirement for both fire safety and insurance companies.
Well, I know that there's some programs that some fire departments have in some areas with respect to the prevention of fire is going on an awful lot in some areas. And that's what part of the role of what many fire departments have in many communities is going out there and inspecting and doing things in advance, as well as what do you do, once you start to have a fire. So I have heard of these things. And I think fire departments that are doing that are part of the community even more so. It's not just at the best loss you ever have is the one you prevent, so it doesn't happen. So I think fire departments have historically been part of the community that way, and that's not uncommon in some areas. Some areas you don't have that at all. It's volunteer fire departments, or they're just trying to do the best they can. But I guarantee you, every single fireman wishes they didn't have something to do. It's tough enough, for what they have to do. Do you have some more questions for us, Kathy? You just disappeared on me.
I do, but I'm here. I think my video is not looking the best. So the next question is, and this could be either one of you. So California has many fires. How do you overcome the denial of a prior fire that insurance companies use as a reason not to pay?
That's almost legal, and I could of a prior fire, because that's the same thing. It's the same thing that we're hearing with respect to all kinds of checklists, because you could have a prior hail damage, you could have a prior flood, you could have a prior whatever. I think Annie, I'll let you tackle this, but the first thing is to show what actually what was the damage from the prior one. What did you do to clean it up? What did the insurance company say, and what were the findings? But why don't I'll let you, I don't want to take this. It's supposed to be your time to chat. Let me let you go.
Well, I don't know if that's really in my wheelhouse, to be very honest, in the sense of, it's I think that's more of a legal thing, isn't it?
Okay, so I'll answer the question real quick, and then we can move on to something for Annie. I just don't want to hog this, but really quickly, what we try to do is show before and after, before the most recent event, whatever it is. If it's a wildfire, I want to know what the house looked like beforehand. If it had a prior fire, it was close to smoke and things like that. And hear me out. One of these questions are going to come up. Hey, does anybody got a barbecue out there? Do you have this going on? I mean, I've been through these questions before. Does anybody smoke? Have you ever, you just name it. Have you ever had a bad cooking event? I mean, there is 1,001 things happen. Have you ever had a small fire that you didn't report? Because the insurance industry a lot of times is trying to prove, or at least their attorneys are trying to show every way they can not to pay, a claim afterwards. And one of those suggests that, this was a pre-existing problem that wasn't cleaned up and we're not responsible, which is a fair thing for them to ask. So I want to say that it's a fair thing. And so we have these checklists that we go through, because I've been down this road a number of times trying to find out exactly what the best we can, that the house, was like what has been through in the past, who have been smokers, not smokers. I mean, do you smoke a cigar? Do you smoke these kind of cigarettes, and how often it goes? And I'm not going to get too much into the science tonight, but one of the big things is for the Palisades fire and the wildfires there, because the issue is what's the background of some of those exotic materials? Do they just exist even without the wildfires too, has been somewhat of an issue. But Kathy, pick something that Annie can talk about. I talk all the time and I write all the time. I only got her for a few more minutes, and
I think you're doing a fine job, Chip.
Okay, well, this one is directed this is from John for Annie. I've never met a client who knows how to deal with contents damage in a fire. How did you handle this? Did you use age for depreciation or what?
So I have to confess that I had a large portion of my contents list captured. My insurance paid 100% without a list, because back in 2017, the insurance commissioner made that ask. And because it was before we had these continuous losses, that my insurance said, first they came back with, well, we're going to give you 30% more. And I kept working on my list, but I never actually turned that list in. Because then about 2 weeks after that, they called and said, here you go. It's all in your account right now. And I count my blessings for that. But, we do contents on first part of October. We'll be in Altadena and the Palisades, and we'll be doing contents workshops where we teach people. Now I know how, right? Because this is where I work. This is my field now. But being able to explain to them everything, the shipping charges, the taxing, the conditions versus age, all of that, we know that stuff now. They now have an app that people are creating, and that you can capture your contents on it. And it's AI and it's self-populating. So every time someone uses something and somebody else gives it a nudge, that information's stored in there. And at some point, these kind of things will become really impactful in this field. You can also, and I have not done it yet, I was given permission yesterday to capture the contents of my house, because that's how they're going to market it, where you can take a video with some comments, and AI will price everything that you have captured on that video. Now, obviously, there's going to be some fine tuning on all of this, but this is one of the great things that's happening out of LA because of the kind of minds that are there. And, what I would hope for is that the insurance industry would adopt something like this. You would be able to, once a year, do that video, capture a total, and that's how much you would insure your contents for. And you wouldn't have to make this damn list that just is so traumatizing for people.
I personally think that, I think, Kathy, I'm going to say this. I think the contents issue is one of the most complex and overlooked issue, both from valuation before the loss, and people are just guessing because nobody's going to really get it all right, to even, I find that many times the insurance industry, while they're out there, I believe, knowing that there's going to be contractors going to put valuations on the real property, there ain't nobody running around figuring out what the valuation on contents is. And there's a lot of breakage. And I've got, for everybody who's been there, where I got my shoe right here, everybody's been through some of my seminars just to figure out the replacement of this shoe and then get to the actual cash value. We can go through a 45-minute seminar just about my shoes, trying to prove the points and all the things that adjusters have to learn about proper valuation with respect to those. It's a great question to ask. And I think it's one of the ones that some of the insurance companies I really have to applaud. And I even hate to say this in a way, but they deserve it. I've found sometimes you get the right adjusters with State Farm. They'll do a lifestyle type of analysis because everything's burned up, it's gone. and they'll just go through these and within a few hours. I don't know how they go about doing outcomes get checked. And a lot of times, because I think contents is also underinsured, they just pay the policy limit. And I just want to applaud those companies that are trying to do things other than, because I've been a critic. Oh, fill out these thousands and one pages and tell me when you bought it, how much it cost, exactly what the condition is, da 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 da. And they're still leaving out some of the valuation issues. And it really, so I teach this. It is a very complex issue, and whoever asked the question, congratulations to you, because it's often overlooked. Kathy, we have time for another question, even though we're running a little bit late. Go ahead, Annie. Go ahead.
I'd just like to add that, the whole receipt thing is preposterous. My adjuster asked me for receipts, and I said, I tend to be a smart aleck, but it was my natural inclination to say, so do you want me to go get some ash and put it in a baggie? I mean, how do you expect me to do this? Right. And he was like, okay, forget about it. But now they're pushing for that. And that's a really huge challenge for people to capture in.
You're right. I just want to remind everybody that there's not an obligation to keep the receipts of the stuff that you get beforehand that gets destroyed in a fire, but there is an absolute obligation under the policy. And I've warned policyholders, if you don't keep the receipts with respect to those things, that is a policy condition for replacement cost that if some companies push on, it's there. I think, I could go on. Arizona has a great thing that there's no limit, no time limit. You could wait forever, just about, so long as the insurance company's not prejudiced to replace all your stuff, if that's really what it is. And, making people replace within 180 days, a year, 2 years, whatever is in there, is an arbitrary figure that we should stop allowing the insurance industry to have with respect to the replacement of your contents. When it all gets wiped out, I mean, it'll take you 40, 50 years sometimes to collect all your stuff. How long? And then they say, oh, you only get 2 years to go get it back. Give me a break. We could stop that.
You don't even have a house to put it in. How do you get it?
And then you got it right. It's ridiculous. So I've said enough on that. And really, the politicians ought to stand up and put an end to it. The insurance industry themselves, if they really can, I've yet to have somebody tell me why there's that limitation on there. And I think you talk about attorneys writing something, it's breakage. So people can't even collect on it. So, but don't get me, obviously I get emotionally charged of it. I think that's so wrong on the contents. How about one more, Kathy, before I know we promised everybody to get off in an hour. So can you give me one more for Annie?
Yeah, we still have a good crew on. So yeah, let's throw one more at Annie. And I love this question. What are some of the biggest mistakes homeowners make regarding their claims after a wildfire?
Definitely not doing the documentation, not being organized so that they can work it properly, because it is work. They're thinking in many cases that they paid for this insurance and this is what they're going to get. They don't understand how big of a challenge it potentially could be. And not knowing it, I have to say that in LA, many of them are running out and they're getting architects and they're designing their dream house, but they don't yet know how much a contractor will charge, and they don't yet know what their insurance company is going to pay them. And so you're spending more money on something that is going to come out of your insurance, but you're not going to be able to capture, right? So you're paying for those architectural drawings. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And that's a big deal. You have to know the process. And the process is not, my neighbor found a contractor and I'm going to go with him. It's find out how much money you have. What can you afford to rebuild? What resources do you have? A lot of people in my fire, the contents, we weren't going to replace all that. You utilize some of your contents to bridge the gap. You use the SBA loans, but you have to have those figures and you have to resolve it with the insurance companies to even start on that.
Yeah, that's a good question too, and an answer. I just remind everybody the actual replacement of the building that got burned down is a theoretical amount. that you have to figure out and know you can go out and build back any way you want, unless the insurance company's going to try to build it back themselves. But I don't know anybody's going to do that. But it's a theoretical amount that then you can go back and rebuild any way you want. So you first have to come up with what's that replacement cost amount that they're going to pay on a theoretical basis for the one that burned down. You then, and should, I tell people, think about how you want to rebuild it that suits your lifestyles, well, whatever it is. As a matter of fact, you might want to just buy something somewhere else. And those are the options people have. I start to see Kathy, it's or unless you want to have one more here, it's Andy, tell me this. If people go to United Policyholders, where should they go with respect to United Policyholders on the web and look for some help?
So every time there's a disaster, we have a library and we do a particular one for that area. So LA is under 2025 LA wildfires, and those will be state specific. It'll walk you through the process. It has all the right steps for you to take. And then if you need a deeper dive, that's something that comes a little bit later when you have the bandwidth, and that you've contacted us and asked for help, whatever that looks like, because our website has 34 years of information on there. And not survivors can't handle all that. One click could take you to another. So those designated disaster sites are gold.
I appreciate it. Any last comments before I let you go tonight? And I really appreciate you coming on this. It's such a different voice to hear.
I appreciate you having me on. I think that if people learn one thing, it's that survivors know nothing. We don't know the questions to ask. We don't know where to go look for the questions in many cases, and it leaves people very vulnerable, and they're at risk. And so tread lightly and just know that the good people rise to the top.
Perfect. Annie, thank you for all you've done and all that you continue to do. And thank you to United Policyholders as well. Kathy, great job tonight. I appreciate all your help. Well, for everybody, thank you very much. If you have anything else, don't hesitate. Maybe I can get Annie to come back and write a guest blog someday if we have some other questions you'd like to have her answer. But Kathy, I think we ought to say goodnight to everybody so Annie can get back and have that wine with her friends. And I'm going to have some down here with my client down here in Gulfport, Mississippi. So
Perfect.
take care.
Thank you.